Arkansas. We've got a couple marquee games coming up here, Steven. So who's next on your list?
Cincinnati at Arkansas.
I knew it.
South Carolina is one of those games. South Carolina is one of those teams I'm excited about, but Arkansas is too. I know you're really high on KJ Jefferson and Arkansas this year, but this Cincinnati team is really interesting. They of course made the college football playoff last year, and they have had some turnover on the roster. Desmond Ritter's gone. They lost some of their key guys on defense. I actually don't think they're going to take too much of a step back. They've added Ben Bryant, who is a transfer from Eastern Michigan. What's actually kind of unique about him is he started his career at Cincinnati, went to Eastern Michigan, is now back at Cincinnati. So he could be the starting quarterback. And if he's not, it's Evan Prater, who is a pretty highly touted prospect coming out of Ohio, more of a dual threat guy. So maybe Cincinnati could play two quarterbacks here. But I think overall, like the strength of this team is they have five starters back on the offensive line. Corey Kiner, the LSU transfer, could play some at running back. But overall, I think they have that sort of strong culture, strong identity. Luke Fickell, their coach, has just done a good job of building this program up over the last couple of years. So I don't think they are as good as they were last year. But in terms of just danger, I mean, they're coming off the playoff. They have a good two deep. They have two quarterbacks I think they can win with. So they are pretty dangerous if you're Arkansas.
Now, I don't know if you saw it, Steven, but Sam Pittman, he had the quote of the week here when asked about Cincinnati and their offensive approach with the new quarterback, new offensive coordinator.
Multiple guy. How big a challenge is that for you all's defense?
Well, it's a big challenge because, you know, they lost their quarterback, they lost their tailback, and they lost a really good wideout. Well, they got to transfer in from Hawaii, who's really a good player, and they've got two separate quarterbacks that might, who knows who's going to play, and not positive who the running back's going to be yet. So but we do know, and they got a new coordinator. So you don't know exactly what they're going to do, but I think we've got enough defense in that we can attack whatever we see. I think the first couple series are going to be really important to figure out kind of, what they're bringing to the party. Some guys bring iced tea and some guys bring liquor, and you just got to figure out what they're bringing. I mean, hey, go into 2-minute offense. You'll figure out what kind of party you're going to on the first play. They come after you, you're going home. Okay, this is what kind of party it's going to be. Or they'll drop 8 and you got to dink and dunk and get down in there. So the first two series on both sides of the ball will be a big, big thing on Saturday, in my opinion, and how fast our coaches make adjustments and how fast theirs does. I think can't wait till half. The game's halfway over at that point. So we got to really get good communication up front or up top and see what we need to see to figure all this stuff out.
Yeah. I mean, leave it to Sam Pittman to put it that way, but really that is obviously a big, mystery of what Cincinnati will look like. But I got a lot of Arkansas fans asking me, Stephen, how intact is this roster? You mentioned some turnover. So, if you can give us a roundabout view of how much of this roster that went to the college football playoff is returning for Cincinnati.
Yeah, they lost a lot. I think the names that college football fans would probably remember would be Ahmad Gardner, the cornerback, the standout cornerback who was the first round pick of the Jets. Also, Kobe Bryant, the other corner. That really, I think, is the one spot I think for Cincinnati that's a little bit kind of mysterious for me, because when I look at their defense in the front seven, I see a lot of guys who played last year, maybe weren't starters, they were co-starters. They've added a transfer from Miami of Ohio at linebacker. So I think their front seven on defense is going to be fine. I think the question will be those cornerback spots and how do they fill in for someone like Gardner, who was so good. And of course, their front was good too. So they sort of worked in tandem together. But if I'm Arkansas, knowing what Alabama did to this defensive line and overall group and pushed them around in the playoff, that's where I would want to challenge them, even with the new starters at cornerback. And maybe you set up those throws to Jefferson and from Jefferson to Landers and Hazelwood. So if I'm Arkansas, I test them right away on the defensive line.
Well, that's interesting, Steve, because I was going to ask you about kind of the inverse. Cincinnati bringing back Sam Pittman says all 5 starters on the offensive line, and Arkansas's completely reworked defensive line. It's rare that you would see a non-conference matchup with an SEC team like this where the opponent may have an advantage on the line of scrimmage, but would you go that far? Do you think Cincinnati will have an advantage when it's their offensive line versus Arkansas defensive line?
It's a good question. I certainly think that in terms of American Athletic Conference play, Cincinnati's offensive line is probably the best in the AAC. But of course, there's a big difference between playing, Memphis and East Carolina and stepping up to the SEC and playing teams like Alabama, teams like Arkansas. That is a mystery for me for Arkansas, and just seeing how that group up front fills in, because I'm pretty high in the linebackers when you get guys like Bumper Pool. You've got Drew Sanders coming in as a transfer from Alabama. So I know they've got 5 starters back, but I think if I'm Arkansas, knowing that the talent that they've had in the way that this group played last season, even with guys like Ridgeway gone, I would still like this matchup if I'm Arkansas.
One final question I got for Cincinnati, Stephen. Going, yeah, that we know they went to the playoff and all this. They had a magical year. I get that. I'm not trying to downgrade that, but have they ever experienced any environment like they're going to see Razorback Stadium in your mind? Have they ever played in an environment quite like that?
It's a good question. See, last year they played at Notre Dame, which was definitely, I know it's maybe not necessarily, comparing environments, but Notre Dame's a tough place to play. They went on the road and won, but again, it was just it's such a different team
Mm-hmm.
that it's hard to say how that, kind of how that stacks up for them. But certainly, season opener, Arkansas, after having all that offseason momentum, I think, the Fayetteville will be very hostile for the Bearcats on Saturday. One thing I should note about Cincinnati's offense: tight ends. Keep an eye on Wiley and Leonard Taylor, the 2 tight ends. They're very talented. So if you're Arkansas and you're worried about pass catchers on the outside, the 2 guys that are playing the tight end spot might be of a concern for Arkansas as they try to keep this Cincinnati offense in check.